"Animals don't run a modern ranch, Silas," Austin Reed said, a smug smirk playing on his lips. He said it with the absolute confidence of a man who believed he had just made the smartest point in the room. And because he was young, radiating self-assurance, and standing beside a brand-new polished pickup truck with a high-tech drone case sitting proudly in the back, a few of the hired hands working near the fence laughed along with him. The morning sun was slowly rising, casting its first golden rays over the vast, wind-swept, sun-drenched highlands of Texas. The pasture grass was dry and brittle, turning a pale yellow in several sectors. A searing wind moved low across the ground, kicking up swirling trails of dust along the barbed wire fence line. In the distance, a flock of sheep stood huddled together, their heads bowed low, moving so slowly and texturally that they resembled a single, massive white cloud resting on the earth. Right beside the heavy wooden gate leading to the main barn stood a mature Texas Longhorn steer. His Nalkund. Truth be told, Samson wasn't much to look at. His coat was rough and weathered, showing bald patches carved by time. One of his magnificent long horns was chipped at the tip. His spine dipped slightly with age, and he possessed a slow, deliberate gait that made it seem as though he had to ponder deeply before taking every single step. When Austin looked at Samson, all he saw was wasted feed. He saw a useless financial burden that required care for no return. He saw a prehistoric creature that belonged to a bygone era. The old cattleman standing next to him, however, did not laugh. Silas had owned the neighboring land for over 40 years. He wore the same faded, sweat-stained cowboy hat every single day, the same worn-out boots with cracked leather, and carried a calm, unreadable expression that constantly made people wonder, was this old man simply listening, or was he reading right through your soul? Austin had purchased the Reed family ranch just 6 months prior. His late father had raised cattle on this very soil, but Austin had entirely different ideas. He had gone to college. He had studied advanced agricultural technology. He had watched every online seminar about smart ranching, intensive grazing efficiency, predator control, weather sensors, pasture mapping, and remote biometric monitoring. He had high-definition cameras covering every square inch of the barn. He had motion-activated floodlights surrounding the lambing pens. He had GPS tracking tags clipped to the ears of the lead livestock. He owned a commercial drone that could scan the entire perimeter in mere minutes. He took immense pride in his brand-new digital electric fence charger, a real-time weather application, and automated push alerts on his phone for everything from sudden wind shifts to the exact open-closed status of every gate. And the only thing he was absolutely certain he didn't need was an old, lumbering steer named Samson. "I'm telling you the truth, Silas," Austin said, resting one arm casually on the wooden gate. "The old ways are fine for campfire stories. But I've got cameras now. I've got automated warning systems. I can sit comfortably inside my house and monitor the furthest corner of the south pasture with a single swipe on my screen." Silas turned his head slowly, looking out toward Samson. The old steer remained stationary, right at the boundary of the flock. He wasn't grazing, nor was he sleeping. His cloudy but deeply focused eyes were fixed entirely on the distant, dark tree line. "A phone can't smell danger, son," Silas said, his voice deep and gravelly, like the earth itself. "And it certainly can't hear what's wrong before it's been programmed to look for it." Austin smiled, shaking his head in polite disagreement. "Come on, Silas. I highly respect your experience. I truly do. But this is 2026. I don't need a grumpy, oversized steer standing around doing nothing just to pretend he's security." Samson flicked one of his large, coarse ears, as if he understood the mockery. Silas stared at Austin for a long, heavy moment, a quiet sorrow lingering in his old eyes. "There are some things your machines will never hear, until it is already too late." Austin gave a courteous nod, the kind of nod people give when they have already slammed their ears shut and decided they are done listening. He turned on his heel and walked toward the barn. "The buyer from the children's petting zoo is coming next week to check him out," Austin called back. "Maybe Samson can spend his remaining years letting little kids brush his coat." Silas didn't reply right away. He just silently watched the old steer lumber between the herd, slow and quiet, just as he had done 1,000 times before. Finally, Silas muttered softly into the wind, "That animal has saved more young stock than you have ever sold." Austin chuckled under his breath. "Yeah, I'm sure he did," he muttered to himself, not believing a single word of it. Not one bit. Most people looking at Samson wouldn't have believed Silas either. The old steer didn't look like a warrior. He wasn't fierce. He wasn't majestic. He looked like a heap of forgotten ash from the past, left behind while everything else on this ranch became newer, faster, cleaner, and vastly more expensive. But Samson had never spent his life being a decoration. He had spent it being present. He had been there, guiding the sheep through freezing winter blizzards, chaotic spring births, scorching Texas summers, and those agonizingly long nights when the predators began to howl just beyond the dry creek bed. He recognized the distressed cry of a ewe going into labor. He knew the frantic bleat of a lost lamb separated from its nyashada. And above all, he could feel the sudden fearful shift that rippled through the entire flock long before a human could ever sense a disruption. Samson knew exactly which patch of grass was safe and which path hid treacherous sinkholes. He knew when the silence of the prairie meant peace, and when. That silence hid sharp teeth. For years, Samson slept with the flock, ate with the flock, and moved to the rhythm of the flock. He wasn't a pet. He was a pillar of the pasture, an invisible but unbreakable link that kept the ranch from fracturing in the dark. Yet, Austin was entirely blind to it all. To Austin, Samson was merely an obsolete relic left behind by his father. And Austin was building a ranch that looked strictly forward, never backward. Then, late one afternoon, the Texas sky shifted violently. At first, it was nothing more than a bruised, charcoal-gray wall of clouds appearing at the edge of the western horizon. Austin saw it on his weather app before he ever bothered to pull back his curtains to look at the actual sky. The meteorological alert warned of a dry lightning storm system, a rancher's worst nightmare ripping through the high plains, bringing ferocious wind gusts but absolutely no rain to cool the earth. Austin wasn't worried. Storms happened every year. He calmly checked the barn cameras and verified the gate sensors. He ensured the feed room was locked tight and the main lambing shed was packed with fresh, dry straw. Because several ewes were close to giving birth, he had moved the entire flock into the large wooden barn located in the lower pasture, a low-lying area sheltered by ancient cottonwood trees, protected from the razor-sharp winds. Samson had slowly followed the herd inside. Austin had initially planned to drive the old steer out. He had even walked down to the barn holding a lead rope, intending to lock the old beast in a small, cramped pen behind the workshop, just to get him out of the way. But as he opened the barn gate, Samson abruptly stepped forward. The massive steer planted his heavy body squarely between Austin and the sheep. His ears pinned forward, his clouded eyes locked onto Austin, completely unmoving like a wall of solid stone. Austin sighed in deep frustration. "You are the most stubborn, useless animal on this entire property." Samson didn't budge. "Fine," Austin thought. "Let him stay in there one last night. The buyer takes him next week anyway." By the time the sun had fully set, the sky looked battered, stained in deep shades of purple and indigo. Ominous clouds stacked heavily over the fields. The wind began to roar, violently slamming against the metal doors of the workshop. Dust and dry debris blew sideways across the yard. Down in the lower pasture, the sheep grew increasingly restless, packing themselves tightly together, head to head. Inside the reinforced house, Austin sat comfortably at the kitchen table, his laptop open. A steaming mug of coffee sat beside him, his small screen displaying a crisp, high-definition live stream from the barn camera, while his phone charged near the window. A little after 8 p.m., the atmosphere grew suffocatingly dense. The wind howled like a wounded beast. And then, at exactly 9 p.m., the first dry lightning bolt struck. It was an apocalyptic sound that tore the sky apart, accompanied by a blinding flash of blue-white light that struck the main power line running right along the roof of the wooden barn down in the lower pasture. The ground trembled. Austin's house shuddered. Every single light inside died instantly, and absolute darkness swallowed the world in a fraction of a second. Austin bolted upright. A second later, the backup battery system in his office clicked on, and the router lights blinked back to life. "It's fine," he muttered to himself, trying to calm his racing heart. "The smart system will automatically reconnect." He grabbed his phone. The screen displayed a chilling message: "No signal." Austin frowned, his heart skipping a beat. He rushed to the window and looked out. Outside, the darkness was thick as ink. The security lights around the workshop were completely dead. The lower pasture was now a vast, silent wall of blackness. He frantically opened the ranch management app on his phone. Loading. Still loading. Connection timeout. Austin switched to the barn camera. Feed lost. He checked the gate sensors. Offline. He checked the weather station. Offline. His brand new electric fence charger had a battery backup, but without a network connection, it couldn't transmit a single byte of data to his device. His expensive drone sat uselessly in its case, as the ferocious winds outside would tear its rotors apart in seconds. The cameras were blind. The sensors were deaf. Every automated alert he had once bragged about was now nothing more than dead text on a cold, dark screen. For the very first time since pouring a fortune into all that technology, Austin felt the land beneath his feet become impossibly vast, foreign, and terrifying. He realized he was completely isolated. He hurriedly threw on a heavy coat and grabbed a large tactical flashlight. But right before his hand could turn the doorknob to rush outside, a horrific sound pierced through the walls, drowning out the roaring wind. It wasn't thunder. It was a violent, agonizing, yet furious roar of a bull. It was long, raspy, and sharp as a dagger, stabbing right through the stormy night. Austin froze in place. Goosebumps erupted across his skin. Samson roared a second time. This time, there wasn't a single trace of old age or slowness in that sound. It was an instinctual red alert. And along with that roar, Austin looked out the window and saw a bright orange-red glow beginning to erupt from the lower pasture barn. The ranch was on fire. Austin burst through the door like an arrow. The scorching wind slammed into his face, carrying the most terrifying scent any rancher could ever encounter: the acrid smell of burning straw. Swirling ash and embers filled the night sky. He ran frantically toward the lower pasture, his flashlight beam dancing erratically over the rugged, rocky ground. "Samson!" "The sheep!" Austin screamed, his voice immediately swallowed by the gale. As he drew closer to the barn, a horrific sight materialized. The dry lightning had struck the aging electrical lines running along the wooden roof, and the massive surge had ignited the thick layers of dry straw inside. By now, the fire had consumed half the roof, turning the barn into a roaring, bright red furnace in the dead of night. Terrified bleating echoed from within. The innocent sheep were panicking, trampling over one another as they crowded into the far corner. But they were trapped. Thick, toxic black smoke billowed upward, choking out all visibility. And the absolute worst had happened. The massive oak support beam holding up the front awning had been eaten away by the flames and had collapsed, pulling the heavy wooden barn door down with it, completely blocking the flock's only exit. Austin stood paralyzed, his entire body trembling. He couldn't go inside. The heat was too intense, the smoke too lethal. Where was his technology now? His expensive cameras were nothing but melting plastic. His smart sensors couldn't extinguish a raging inferno. Just when he thought he would have to helplessly watch his family's entire livelihood burn to ash, he saw Samson. The old steer hadn't fled. Amidst the toxic smoke that made it impossible for a human to breathe, Samson was standing right at the collapsed entrance. He let out a thunderous roar, a majestic, commanding sound that overpowered the crackling of the flames. The old Longhorn stepped forward, lowered his massive, powerful shoulders, and using his wide horns and his age bowed back. He rammed directly into the burning support beam. Austin's eyes widened in sheer disbelief. Samson utilized the raw, muscular strength of a creature that had survived a lifetime of tempests, bracing himself to lift the burning, collapsing wooden structure. The scorching wood pressed hard against his back. The sickening sound of searing flesh hissed through the air. The foul smell of burning hair erupted. The agonizing pain caused Samson's entire body to shudder violently, his 4 legs anchoring deep into the mud as his knees buckled, threatening to give out. But he did not fall. Samson endured, standing firm like a living pillar of bone and muscle, using his defiant back to hold up the burning door, creating a safe clearing right beneath him. Seeing the escape route, the lead ewe bolted forward, followed by dozens, then hundreds of other sheep. In a frantic, stampeding rush, they poured through the clearing beneath Samson's belly and legs, escaping out onto the open, safe pasture. Samson remained there, his eyes tightly shut against the blinding smoke, enduring the flames that were devouring his back and shoulders, resolutely refusing to take a single step back until the very last lamb had cleared the threshold. "Hey, Silas is here. Put out the fire. Save the sheep." Suddenly, the blinding headlights of Silas's pickup truck cut through the darkness. Silas and 2 other neighbors scrambled out, carrying heavy fire extinguishers and a high-pressure water hose hooked up to a mobile water tank. "Austin! Snap out of it! Grab the hose!" Silas roared, violently shaking Austin's frozen shoulder. Austin snapped back to reality. He grabbed the hose, and together they aimed the powerful stream of water directly at the flames engulfing the exit and Samson's burning back. The water hit the fire, sending up a massive wave of scalding steam. Once the support beam was cooled and the surrounding flames subsided, Samson finally lowered himself. He let out a long, exhausted rasp through his nose and sank his front knees into the damp earth, drenched in sweat, blood, and horrific burn marks. The flock was safe, gathered in a distant corner of the pasture, bleating, trembling, but incredibly fortunate cries. Not a single sheep was lost. Not a single life was left behind. Austin dropped the hose, his hands shaking uncontrollably not from the cold, but from an overwhelming surge of profound remorse and reverence. He slowly approached the old steer, who lay panting heavily in the gray smoke. Samson's massive back, the very asset Austin had dismissed as a useless burden just that afternoon, was now covered in raw blisters, exposed flesh, and charred patches where his proud Texas coat had been incinerated. Silas walked up beside Austin, his cowboy hat drenched in water and soot. He stared at the heroic old steer, then turned his gaze to Austin, his voice low but cutting straight to the young man's soul. "Now, do you still think he's just a useless animal standing around for display?" Austin couldn't utter a word. His throat felt completely choked with emotion, and tears of deep regret finally streamed down his face, mixing with the rain, sweat, and ash on his cheeks. That night, not a single piece of smart technology operated on Austin's ranch. Yet, it was illuminated by the warmth of community and emergency flashlights. The valley's large animal veterinarian, Dr. Harris, arrived shortly after the storm cleared. Under the steady light of flashlights held by Austin and Silas, Dr. Harris meticulously cleaned the severe burns on Samson's back, applying soothing ointments and administering heavy pain medication. The old steer's massive body flinched slightly whenever the needle pierced his skin, but he showed no aggression. He only breathed long, patient, resilient sighs. "Mr. Reed, this steer is an absolute miracle, Doctor," Harris said as she finished bandaging him, her voice filled with profound admiration. At his age, under that kind of intense heat and crushing weight, almost any other animal would have fled out of pure survival instinct. But he stood his ground. "He is exponentially stronger than he appears." Austin stood by, his hands tightly clasped together. He looked at Samson, the creature he had been ready to discard to a petting zoo just hours ago because he deemed him economically worthless. He choked back tears and asked, "Doctor." "Harris. Will he make it?" "He'll pull through, Doctor." Harris smiled, gently patting an uninjured section of Samson's shoulder. "But he needs significant rest and dedicated care. This back will leave a massive scar, but it is the scar of a hero." After Dr. Harris departed, the barn fell into a quiet stillness, leaving only Austin, Silas, and the old steer. Austin stepped closer, sinking to one knee into the damp earth, and slowly reached out his hand to gently touch Samson's chipped horn. This time, he didn't see an old, expensive mouth to feed. He saw years of silent devotion. He saw a priceless presence that no line of code, no high-tech camera could ever hope to replicate. "I'm so sorry, old friend." "I am truly sorry," Austin whispered, tears of profound regret splashing onto the ground. Samson slowly blinked his cloudy eyes, exhaling a long breath through his nostrils as if to say, "It's all right, young man." Silas stepped forward, placing a calloused, heavy hand on Austin's shoulder. "Your father bought Samson during a massive storm just like this one years ago. Back then, Samson saved your father's entire cattle herd from a flash flood. Your father respected him not because he generated profit, but because he possessed absolute loyalty. Sometimes, technology only shows you the numbers, Austin, but instinct and devotion are what keep a ranch alive through the darkest nights." A few days later, the man from the children's petting zoo called Austin to finalize the pickup date for Samson. Austin stood at the barn doorway, watching Samson leisurely graze in the pasture, his back wrapped in stark white bandages but his stride noticeably lighter. The playful young lambs darted around him, occasionally coming close to rub their heads against the old steer's legs in a beautiful display of gratitude. Austin pressed the phone firmly to his ear and said decisively, "Cancel the deal, sir. Samson is not for sale. He is family, and he will remain on this ranch until his very last breath." By the following spring, Austin's ranch was once again hosting agricultural students for educational tours. Austin still proudly demonstrated his thermal imaging drones and explained his smart management software. The students listened intently, scribbling notes in admiration. But whenever the tour concluded, Austin always led them down to the fence line of the lower pasture. There, a mature longhorn steer with a massive, prominent scar stretching across his back stood proudly among the flock. Austin would point toward Samson and speak to the young generation with absolute humility. "And this is Samson, the most advanced security system this ranch will ever own. When all your screens go dark, and when every piece of technology becomes blind in the face of nature's wrath, the only thing that will save your lives is the weight of tradition, instinct, and the sheer resilience of those who came before us. Learn to use technology to advance, but never, ever forget the foundational pillars that hold up the ground you stand on." Silas stood in the distance, a knowing smile gracing his face as he gently tipped the brim of his cowboy hat. The Texas wind continued to sweep across the highlands, carrying the legend of the heroic old steer far and wide, serving as a powerful reminder to everyone. In this world, There are silent values that never go out of style, and the truest guardians are often the ones who boast the least.